Well, this is Jim Copple with the Legacy Project, and we are honored to have Eric Mills from Martin County, Kentucky. Um, that is correct. You live in Martin County, right, Eric?
Uh, yes, Martin County, Kentucky, last I checked.
Eric is the CEO of Thrive, a community coalition. I met Eric at least 10 years ago, I think, in a project we were doing in Martin County. And I have great memories of not only working with Martin County, a great group of people, but with working with Eric and his leadership and dealing with substance use issues in that county and also some of the crime issues. Martin County, if I'm misspeaking here, you can correct me, but was where Lyndon Johnson in 1964 launched the war on poverty. Um, a war that essentially lost in many ways in Martin County in terms of resources and what that population's had to deal with over the years. But Eric is a great leader. He's a great person, and we're honored to have you here and a part of the Legacy Project, Eric.
Well, thanks for having me, Jim. And yes, we've gone back many years and lots of support and conversations and encouragement along the way. And it's an honor for me to be here having this conversation with you today.
So, Eric, in the Legacy Project, we're curious about leaders from all walks of life and from a variety of countries and places about the influences that have shaped them beyond the inheritances we might receive of cars, houses, boats, etc., but the legacy that has helped shape you. What have been the biggest influences in your life in terms of shaping your legacy?
I growing up in Appalachia, you have a lot of, uh, well, growing up in a distressed community in
Mhm.
central Appalachia, let me narrow it down little bit. There are many visual images, sights, sounds, smells, even that come to mind when I think about what my life has been like here. And of course, we have the beautiful mountains. We have the natural scenery around us that is gorgeous, the creeks and the streams with the little bubbling brook kind of visualization along the mountains in this area and playing in those creeks and taking rocks and building a little dam and all those kinds of things that we did as children and playing together. Um, Family is an important part, an extra important part here. Uh, some from the outside might almost call us clannish, but we love our families and we stay very, very close to each other and celebrate each other's milestones together. And so, birthday parties and family holiday events and so forth were very regular occurrences and gathered around by a large family on my mom's side, especially. There were cousins that I very rarely saw and didn't even know that well, but we were family. And so we got together and it sort of was like a kinship from the beginning. So some of those sort of positive influences are very unique to the culture here for me personally. My grandfather was a huge influence. His name's Lewis Mills, and he he was one of those uh, on the edge of the transition to an industrial society. So when he was young, his father delivered the mail on a horseback, literally across the horse trails. He and his brother cleared sections of the mountain to plant corn. They ran cattle as teenage boys. They did a little bit of lumber work and cutting trees. I mean, it was a pioneering lifestyle in the day. It was hard to imagine, but that was before running water was in our area. It was before established roads in a lot of the area. Certainly before utilities, before electrification. Uh, just the life that he was able to live. He lived to be 96. To start in that era and to pass in the era of the internet and FaceTime was a dramatic shift for him. And so he was a huge influence in my life though, because he would hearken back to those sort of fundamental principles of life. and was had a unique way of always simplifying complex concerns or issues or problems. And so I admired that about him. And a very intellectual man, very, very smart. And in another era, in another season of time, he would have been probably an award-winning engineer. Um, this is a guy who saw an old lawnmower sitting around in his retirement and decided to build a table saw with it. I don't really know why. He just wanted to be able to cut rough lumber. He was a carpenter by trade. Part of my childhood growing up was in his workshop where we were just playing together, or I was playing alone many times with wood and building things and, building mirrors. I remember in seventh grade, I built hall passes, little cut out little shapes of people that was the hall pass for my teacher. So little things like that, where I was able to express creativity and sort of solve problems. And then, the other thing I say about my grandfather and my father too is growing up, we didn't know what a repairman was.
Mm.
On the one hand, there weren't many of them, as I came later to figure out. So you really didn't have many people to call. But on the other hand, it was, a money thing too. So if we had a plumbing issue, we had an electrical issue, we needed um, I don't know, some grading work done on our driveway. I mean, gravels or whatever. We just did it. We just did it. And so certainly that's one of the lessons I have learned along the way is just doing whatever needs to be done in the moment it needs to happen.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't until later in life that I began to more appreciate delegation
Yeah.
involving others a little bit more. Uh, I remember very well my wife and I when we were newly married, and those honeydew lists as they come along, and that list is getting longer and longer. And I just looked at her one day and I said, "Look, I'm doing the best I can, but I can't do all this time." She's like, "Eric, I don't expect you to do it all. I just want to make sure it gets done, and I need you to help us make sure that happens because I don't know anything about that particular thing." Like, oh, the light bulb's like the light bulb moment. Oh, so we can involve other people. So the whole repairman thing might be good or bad. I don't know. Kind of cuts
I
both ways there
I
a little
know
bit.
that if Colleen sees me with a hammer in her hand or a screwdriver, she runs. 'Cause it's- I,
Well,
I do not have any of those capacities.
I made the mistake of trying to impress my wife early on with my woodworking skills I had learned with my grandfather. And once she knew I could do things, she had lots of things for me to do. So advice to the younger folks out there, measure the display of your skills carefully.
That's right. Not only measure, but the way you promote them.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Well,
lots of positive influences and lots of things. But there's been some challenges too.
mhm, yeah. So, what size of a high school did you go to?
I went to my graduating class had I want to say 187 in it, something like that. So, less than 800 for sure, probably more six, 700-ish.
Uh-huh.
And that was the high school here in Martin County. Curiously, that high school now is the enrollment is even much smaller than that,
Yeah.
um, down in the 500s, I think, or so for upper fours, low fives.
Attending that school in Martin County, how did schooling influence you?
You know, lots of debates about that, right? So, um, as I think back about my school and the experience I had, I certainly did not have the scale of opportunity that a lot of larger community schools would have,
Mhm.
right? There wasn't the business CEO that could come in and speak to my class and talk about business. There was not the field trip to the science museum kind of things happening. But there were some highlight moments that, because I didn't necessarily know better, were big deals to me.
Mhm.
Remember the first Commodore 64 computer that we
Yeah.
got in. school, the old Commodore systems. And so I was fascinated by that and wanted to spend time learning how to do that. I remember in first grade, KET, the local, the state's public television station, came in and did a video about my teacher's implementation of a new education curriculum. You know, they're always coming out with new things, and it was a reading curriculum. And I remember being on TV when I was in first grade, and that was a big deal to me because, you know, at that point my TV had four channels. So
Yeah.
so to be on one of those channels was a big deal, and one of them was KET.
Mhm.
And so it really sticks out as a memory of mine. And most of all, what I love about my education experience in Martin County is not what I didn't have, but what I did, which was a loving environment,
Yeah.
teachers that truly cared and were teaching out of passion and commitment to the cause of education, and and they were surrounding me with love and encouragement, as they were all the students. I was That's not unique to me, and and so as I think about, you know, I graduated from a small high school, but I could have went to maybe, you know, a larger town had I been that opportunity, but I would have been the small fish in a big pond, to
Yeah.
use that metaphor. And when you're young and you're figuring out who you are and figuring out what your capabilities are, there's some value of being the big fish in a small pond,
Yeah.
having success early and getting to know what you're capable of and what you can do.
Yeah. Where did you go to college?
Went to Transylvania University, liberal arts college in Lexington, Kentucky. Um, it's the only college I applied to, frankly. No, I applied to UK, I applied to University of Kentucky, but I didn't really want to go there. It was more of a backup. But I went to summer camp, computer camp at Transylvania, and fell in love with a small campus. Uh, Transylvania was only a couple hundred students larger than my high school.
Mhm.
They had just under 1,000 students at Transylvania, and so it was a wonderful opportunity to kind of have some of those bigger
Yeah.
opportunities in a urban setting without getting
Mhm.
uh, overwhelmed by size and feeling out of place. Now, you know, I was the country boy amongst some daddy's girls, shall we say, at the liberal arts college. So I didn't necessarily always fit in, but certainly it was a great education, and I learned how to write at Transylvania. That was the best experience of the liberal arts college. Is that I thought I knew how to write. I had a wonderful AP English teacher in high school, but when I got to Transylvania, I realized I really didn't.
You went to law school too, right?
I did. I'm an attorney by trade. I try not to tell too many people that, but I guess the world knows. Went to University of Kentucky Law School. Um, Curiously, I went to Transylvania because I wanted to be a physician,
Uh-huh.
and so my undergraduate degree is in biology, and
Yeah.
I started about a half of a master's degree in biology, and said I wanted to be a doctor since the fourth grade, and was always fascinated by the body and how it works. And at the end of the day, turned out I was more interested in what being a physician could help me do than actually being a physician.
Yeah.
And it was some good folks at Transylvania that helped me to begin seeing that. And then my stubbornness took a couple more years to realize, hey, you want to be a doctor, not so much to be a doctor, but to help people make a
Mhm.
difference in the world and to have a secure income. And so there's other ways of doing that.
Help people make a difference. Where did that come from? Those are key values that obviously influenced your decisions and decision to go to law school versus going to med school for the wrong reason. But
Yeah.
what shaped those values?
Well, as I mentioned, my grandfather
Uh-huh.
and my grandmother was another one I didn't talk a lot about, but my grandmother was the head cook at the lunchroom in my elementary school,
Hmm.
and she was a very large and in charge personality. and but she had such a giving heart.
Mhm.
Uh, and I grew up next door to my grandparents. I should say that too. So I was the you know the teenage boy that went over to Granny's house and saw whatever leftovers she had so I could eat them, you know, kind of a thing, right? So I had an opportunity to speak with them and interact with them in a lot of ways. And I remember in the elementary school age, it's Christmas time, and I was so excited, and I start looking, and so the Granny gets her tree up, and then the presents start appearing, and I start looking at the names, which one's mine, and all that. And I see all these names of these kids that are not even in our family.
Huh.
And like, who's Brianna? You know, wait a minute, who's Amanda? We don't have what? And my grandmother, being the spirit she was, had as many gifts for other people as she did for her own family. And it's that giving heart that really, that's a moment that sticks out for me.
Mhm.
In As I think about who she was and how she helped kids that were less fortunate.
Mhm.
Even some of these kids had their own, good families that had the financial means for a good Christmas, I should say, and didn't need anything, but she wanted to show love to them,
Yeah.
and especially love to those that didn't have. So that was important. And then the other part of it was my experience with the Kentucky Governor Scholars Program.
Mhm.
That was truly a life-changing experience for me. It's a 5-week program in the middle of the summer for rising high school seniors. And the whole theme of that program was to whom much is given, much is expected and needed in return. And this sense of how much my community had given its best to me and
Mhm.
how much it needed me to give back when the opportunity came along. And it has shaped, it really awoke a passion of public service in my heart that I'm living in today.
It's interesting, as you discussed your education, you went to high school, college, and graduate school in Kentucky.
Mhm.
Um, my experience and the experience of a lot of people, I mean, I went to high school in Kansas City and then Seattle, then I went to school in Boston, went to graduate school in Kansas City, and then back to Boston and Baltimore. I lived all over the place and was educated all over the place. What do you think being educated in Kentucky? Because I know the times that I have been to Kentucky, and you spoke about it earlier, there's this culture that is caring, compassionate. It's frontier, even though it's in the East. uh, how is that being educated and staying in Kentucky had an influence on you?
Well, so I respect those that, like you, went to varying perspectives and different cultural backgrounds, and I've tried to do that through my own travels.
Uh-huh.
But for whatever reason, I felt drawn to this place.
Hmm.
Eastern Kentuckians, especially, goes back to some of our cultural history. Place and the dirt matters a lot. Um, and that's not something I've even been conscious of necessarily.
Yeah.
But when I think about, being educated in Kentucky, Kentucky's the people that are active and involved and do a lot of things. It's a small community. It's a small state of people that do those things. Um, and so being educated here, I've been privileged to go to law school with politicians and judges and business leaders and different folks that are going off and doing wonderful things. And it's really opened the door for a lot of relationships and opportunities through those partnerships and relationships with those that I know from way back, that have allowed my success and the work we're doing here locally to happen. Because in Kentucky, it's a small state, and having those relationships and sort of the who you know is an important part, because it is a small state, and there are many others like me who are native educated Kentuckians,
Mhm.
and our history as a state is just so proud. I mean, we weren't one of the 13, but we were pretty close thereafter. And the whole legacy of Daniel Boone and settling the West through the Cumberland Gap, and the history here is rich and, and prideful,
Yeah.
in the formation of our nation. Henry Clay and Abraham Lincoln and some of those very early founders that shaped the nation in very substantive ways. And knowing as a Kentuckian that I might be able to identify some with some of those personalities and some of that pioneering spirit, um, it's a good thing. It's a source of pride. It's a source of inspiration. I don't know that that I would have been better or worse off had I gone to law school somewhere else.
Mhm.
Uh, but it's all worked out in a way that allows me to be. Look, I never imagined I would be in Martin County. Let's be clear about that.
Mhm.
Uh, like a lot of young folks from here, I was ready to leave and go somewhere else. And the return of events, God saw fit for me to be here, and
Mhm.
then open door after door after door of opportunity for me to thrive and do well in this place with my family around me and familiar in setting, a familiar environment, a place that I know and understand as well as anyone because I've spent my life here. And so, having the opportunity to try to make this place a little bit better is a real legacy and is something that was really important to me. At the end of the day, I hope that I can look back and feel like I made a little bit of a positive difference in this place.
Talking to Eric Mills, who's the CEO of the Thrive Community Coalition. So, for you and your journey, why Thrive? And why is this work important to you?
I chuckle at that a little bit because I still ask myself those same questions. I know this work's important to me because I know that in a small community, in a small state, in a distressed part of the world, I've been blessed with opportunities and gifts to use that I feel like could help contribute. I certainly can't solve all the world's problems, but I can chip away a little bit at some of them. And I feel a strong sense of obligation to do that.
Mhm.
And part of that is from Governor Scholars and that experience. Part of it is the giving nature of my grandmother, the problem solving engineering mindset of my grandfather, my own parents struggling through times of layoff. My dad was laid off in the coal mines for 2 years, and I saw his first cousin show up at my door one year with Christmas gifts because my parents weren't really in a position to do a lot that year. And knowing that sense of community and goodness just goodness, innate goodness in people, uh, was just very meaningful for me growing up. And I go back to what Governor Scholars was talking about that I now know to be scripture, is to whom much is given, much is demanded in return. And so I feel that obligation. And
Mhm.
I know that if I were to leave, it doesn't mean this community folds up. I'm not that important by no means. But I also know that because we are small, every person doing something has a disproportionate level of impact in this place.
Mhm.
And so that's why I'm here. I feel, faith and the role that God has in my life is incredibly important. And I feel like that God opens doors for us to have opportunities where He wants us to be and closes doors, frankly, in other areas where He doesn't see our fit. And as I get older, I'm more surrendered to that notion. And so what happens is I walk out that faith in every way I can, but I recognize that, we we live in a world where there's certain systems and processes and things that come to bear. And so we have to sort of live within that framework. And in that framework for us, it's a nonprofit that allows us to have a vehicle, uh, uh, a structure, an organizational infrastructure that allows this work to be amplified and supported and magnified. And so Thrive came to be out of a lot of work over the last really, really since 2012. This work began at a community level. And in a more meaningful way, in 2014, we recognized as a community the 50th anniversary of the War on Poverty, came together as a community and said, hey, this isn't working despite the best efforts of government, trillions of dollars. Something's missing because we're persistently in a bad financial way. A lot of history there I could talk a lot more about, but ultimately it's where we find ourselves today. And so in 2014, we said we're not going to allow ourselves to have others dictate our future. We're going to take control of our future and our destiny and start building it. And that set in motion. That the event in 2014 was called Dream Martin County. It was Dream Our Dreams. It was define our own destiny, articulate how we want our future to look, and set that vision and run toward it with all we had. So there's several, and I say we, there were several community leaders that came together at that time, and we've had lots of attacks and ups and downs. But in 2022, we formalized that work around a nonprofit called well, it was originally called the Dream Coalition. Now it's called Thrive Community Coalition because we know it takes a coalition of people working together. There's a lot of good resources and opportunities and programs that are happening in our community, but they're fairly siloed. And so Thrive functions as that coalition model that brings it all together.
Mhm.
And so we put the problem or the person that we're trying to help in the center, and we surround them. We just surround them with the resources that are already here, and then Thrive works to fill in the gaps in places where those resources don't exist. And so, what's Thrive doing? Lots of things. Um, it's focused primarily on helping people in recovery, but that's grown into helping youth. It's grown into working with the Toyota Foundation on a community environmental project and walkway and helping our water system improve. We've helped secure funding and grants to build new schools, to expand our adventure tourism through ATV trail development. Lots and lots of things I could go on about there, but ultimately, Thrive grew out of a coalition identifying needs in this community, and somebody has to step up and help solve them and organize them. And hopefully, Thrive is among the partners doing that.
Great answer, and a great story about the creation of Thrive. You're in coal country, and the impact of the coal industry, the ups and the downs of the coal industry, has had an economic impact. And often our legacy is shaped by our environment, not only the homes that we grow in, but the neighborhoods we live in and the states we live in, and the economic dependencies that emerge out of that. I know I've done a lot of work in Detroit, and the automobile industry is, you know, when it's up, everybody's up. When it's down, everybody seems to be down. How have you navigated the ups and downs of the coal industry and all the issues around the coal industry?
Hmm. Well, in the last 10 or 12 years, it's been simple because it's been down
Yeah.
and it's staying down. And so it's more of an acceptance of our reality rather than waiting on the next boom cycle to hit us.
Mhm.
You know, when I mentioned my father's cousin bringing Christmas gifts to our house that year, many years ago, that was during a downtime of the cyclical nature of the coal industry. And my dad was out of work for over 2 years. And so that's tough. Um, I think, how have I navigated it? I've been blessed to be shielded from a lot of it. because until until the most recent, you know, complete decimation over the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, that we've all dealt with that
Yeah.
economically. It's very hard to tell my wife it's very hard to make money where there's no money.
Mm.
Um, and so we've looked at innovation. We looked at creativity around what it is that we can do as a community. Let's look at our assets and let's improve um, and grow. And one of the things that we've been left with from these boom and bust cycles of coal mining is these reclaimed coal mine lands. And so we have roads all over this county, trails, I should say, not they're definitely not roads, trails all over this county, from the gas wells that have been drilled here in remote locations to the reclaimed coal mine lands. Uh, and and in today's world, that's a very precious commodity. A lot of folks are interested. We've mapped over 300 miles of trails in
Wow.
this county of population 12,000. It's a small county population and geographically, but hundreds of miles of these trails. And so we're turning that into an asset.
Mhm.
Been working with the Regional Trails Authority. I actually was fortunate to help negotiate the first lease on 45,000 acres of land with our largest absentee landowner. There's a lot I could talk about with our history and how that shaped us, absentee land ownership. When you think about the automobile industry ups and downs, the coal ups and downs, um, our people have largely been exploited for their labor. And in the very early days of the 1900s, their ignorance of the value of their minerals.
Mm.
And so there's a history there of that exploitation and sort of the company versus the individual and that whole, well, it gave rise to the whole labor movement and that gave
Yeah.
birth to unions in this region. And and that has shaped us as a suspecting and questioning culture. We don't trust easily these days. But from Thrive's perspective, what we see, and one of the reasons I feel like I'm here is we trust people who are from here by and large because we've all walked through those challenges together. We all have lived out that legacy of life together. And so when we think about, how we deal with the bust cycle of the coal industry, over the last 10 years and why we're taking innovation, why we're sort of running headlong into the challenge, we're going to turn our greatest challenge into our best asset. That's our mantra. Everywhere we can. We've been plagued by addiction, but we are taking that addiction challenge and by adding and growing our treatment accessibility here locally, by adding worker skills, and we were some of the first innovators in the country to take drug treatment and substance use treatment um, that was funded through a decision our governor made in 2015 to include full parity for mental and behavioral health as a part of the Affordable Care Act expansion. That made Medicaid available to everybody who had a substance use disorder issue.
Yeah.
That then created a funding mechanism for treatment. We took that treatment, turned it into an asset, and by having those folks find a life in recovery and then pairing that with worker skills and then aiming that at community development activities like trail development, like downtown revitalization, you get a lot of people energized to want to do more and finding a new lease on life. And so we're trying to help channel that energy into a vision for a better future. I'm trying to not talk too much, Jim, but I'm
Yeah.
pretty passionate about this stuff. I can go into a mile deep anywhere you want to go. So
Yeah. Well,
bring me in.
I can tell you're passionate. How many kids do you have?
I have four
Four
kids, two
kids.
adult kids that have left the nest, and then two that are got 1 foot out the door. They're 15 and 17.
What is the legacy you want to leave them, Eric?
I would say I want them to first know God
Hmm.
and first know the importance of faith in their lives and how that gets them through tough times and allows them to better appreciate the good times. But I also want them to understand the importance of service, um, the importance of knowing that they've been blessed with a lot of opportunity and a lot of um, they've seen a lot of the world. We travel a lot. They've seen places where it's affluent and wonderful. They've seen places where there are even more challenges than here. Not many of them, but a few.
Mhm.
And I want them to know that they are given gifts by God to make a difference in the place that He has planned for them to go and be present. And I know that every person has those gifts,
Yeah.
unique and different. But I want my kids to know that those gifts are not there for them to build up themselves or to build their own storehouse and become wealthy for no cause.
Mhm.
Their gifts are to make a difference and make somebody else's life a little bit better and to leave this world a little bit better than they found it.
That's a
That's what I
great,
want
yeah,
to
it's a
do.
great legacy. You know, Stephen Covey wrote the book Seven Habits with highly effective people. The second habit is living with the end in mind.
Yep.
So when it's all said and done, if they could get it all on your tombstone, what do you want your tombstone to say? Living with the end in mind.
You know, I've got this vision in my head of a flourishing economy
Hmm.
where people don't feel like they have to leave here,
Hmm.
where entrepreneurship is embraced and welcomed and supported, where the culture of faith and compassion continues in that new paradigm. Because we have that culture of faith and compassion today.
Yeah.
We do have that. And so I guess if you put it all on my tombstone, if I had to say something, I'd want it to say he gave it all he had.
Hmm. Yeah.
You know, he gave it all he had. I really want the world to know that they have gifts and a purpose and that it's incumbent upon them to discover that, to be intentional about finding that, to not be lulled into this life of mediocrity that's comfortable and fear keeps them from finding who they were really meant to be.
Yeah.
So I want people to not be afraid because I've lived in this culture of fear my whole life. Um, well, I can't say this because I'll make this political faction upset, and then they won't give me a job because they control the school system. I mean, one of the shaping fundamental examples. My grandmother is a board of elections race for the local school board, and my grandmother wanted a different person to win than she voted for. And
Uh,
when that person that she wanted to win won, she was so happy and excited. But she told me she didn't vote for it. I said, "Why did you not vote for it?" As I couldn't understand. Well, this and that. And she didn't really elaborate a whole lot. As I became older, I become to realize that fear paralyzes people.
yeah. Sure
And
does.
that when you're bold in faith and surrender and you know your purpose and you live into it, you do give it all
Yeah.
because you know that's why you were made. And I just hope more and more people can find that. And I know in this place, if more people are empowered with that freedom of surrender and that empowered with that passion to let that passion loose that God birthed in their soul,
Mhm.
that's how the world changes. That's how people experience this perfect tapestry of talents and skills where they're coming together for the betterment of all of us because
Yeah.
that's God's plan.
Yeah. You know, I was in did some work in East Africa, Southeast Africa, specifically Swaziland, now the country of Eswatini. And I remember going to a graveyard where there were several former missionaries buried. And on the tombstone of this one missionary, it said, she did all she could. That's all it said. I think when I look back on that, That's a great statement. She did all she could. So, well, my last question is a little off topic in some ways, but it's not. Um, I don't know if you've seen the movie Leap Year uh, with Amy Adams. In that movie, uh, the suitor in this case asks the question, if your house caught on fire, what's the one thing you would take? And it doesn't include pets or people, but what's the one thing that you would take that would encapsulate your life? I know my father gave me from the Second World War, and he was wounded in the Second World War, but it's a black box. It's a medical kit, and that he took off the island of Tarawa. And inside that box, I keep my admissions card to Harvard, my grade card, my first semester in college, uh, a lock of hair from the girl I dated in high school. I keep stuff that are just symbolic. I would probably grab that. I know my pictures are all on my computer, et cetera, et cetera. But what's the one thing you would grab?
I'm probably not as sentimental of things.
Mhm.
Um, so there's very little, to my wife's annoyance, frankly, there's very little that I value in stuff.
Mhm.
The one thing I would say that, I mean, I would probably grab my family Bible.
Yeah.
Um, I have this Bible that I remember as a child. It's the thick version with the bounding and all that. And I remember that. And I remember my dad reading it. I remember it being present in our home. And if I was going to grab a thing, it would probably be that thing.
Mhm.
Uh, I have some of those old memories. I used to, it's funny, when I was young, I used to save everything. My mom would get so annoyed. Like I had every t-shirt from every summer program I'd ever gone to, and every newspaper headline or every newspaper that I was in.
Yeah.
Just started keeping some of the old ones from, uh, I remember for some reason I just was fascinated with the Iran-Contra thing years ago. And I kept the newspaper headline of Oliver North, being sworn in and all that stuff. So weird, weird stuff back in that day. But the Bible is a representation of who I am,
Mhm.
what my family represents, and while there's lots of copies of that, I know lots of hands have touched that one.
That's a good way to put it. Eric, thanks for your time. And you have a great story and a great legacy that you've inherited. And and you're leaving a legacy that's going to shape a lot of lives in Martin County and in Kentucky. So it's an honor to know you and to have worked with you off and on these many years. So thanks for being a part of the Legacy Project.
Jim, thank you. It's an honor for me to get to share a little bit about some of my stories, and I've been a very blessed man,
Mhm.
and I'm very grateful for the life that God's allowed me to lead. And if it ended tomorrow, I hope it doesn't, but if it ended tomorrow, I would know and have comfort that I gave
Yeah,
it all I.
it's a good word. To find out more information about this conversation and other Legacy Podcast episodes, go to servantforge.org. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app and consider leaving us a review. The podcast was produced by Matt Erickson, music by David Hyde. Please look for a new episode on our podcast coming out soon. Remember, you have inherited a great legacy. You have an opportunity to create a great legacy. Engage your past to build your future.